So many people think that they are alone. They think, I'm the only one. I'm the only one who has this inner critic. I'm the only one who can't do this. You're not the only one. And sometimes just hearing a story of someone else who has been there, I truly believe that sharing those stories is such a gift to give to the world because we all go through struggles. It's what we do with those struggles.
She's known as America's most trusted celebrity psychologist, bringing unparalleled energy and over 20 years of psychology and neuroscience to everything she does.
Happiness is a science. And so when we apply the science of happiness, we all can be happier.
As a best-selling author, renowned public speaker, and a television mainstay on shows like GMA, The Today Show, and CNN, Dr. Elizabeth Lombardo is known as one of the country's most influential experts on stress.
91% of workers report unmanageable stress. 91%. That means they're spending a lot of time in this red zone.
NBA Hall of Famer Shaquille O'Neal even calls her his head coach of happiness.
Complete disclosure, Shaq has always been happy, so it wasn't like I had a lot of work to do.
That was an easy job.
Right.
I've been friends with Dr. Lombardo for over a decade now, and every time she visits our offices at Flying House, I end up learning a little something new about myself, though usually she's just calling me out for deflecting her difficult questions.
I'm not going to say it. I'll tell you after.
Deflection.
You've called me out on deflecting many times before.
This is the Curiosity Blueprint, brought to you by Flying House Media.
And now, let's get to my conversation with Dr. Elizabeth Lombardo.
Yep.
All right.
What am I pulling you from? What have you been up to most recently?
So personally, I have a incoming junior in college and an freshman in college. So I call it a free bird. I will be an empty nester next year and looking forward to really letting them float and fly and really focusing on I call it my career, but really it's my purpose. So helping people be happier regardless of what's going on. And let's face it, a lot of people are dealing with a lot of stress right now. And the beauty is we don't have to wait for life to change ourselves internally, which changes everything.
But this is not the career path you initially set out in. How is it that you ended up becoming a psychologist?
So when I went to college, I thought I was going to be a medical doctor. And this was back in the dark ages when medicine went from being very lucrative to being very controlled. And we had a lot of family friends who were medical doctors who told me, don't go into medicine. It's not a place to be. So I thought, okay. So I decided to go into physical therapy, looked into physical therapy. Great profession, was a physical therapist for a while, loved being a physical therapist, and just realized how much psychology is involved in physical therapy. So regardless of how good of a PT I may have been, if my client was depressed or anxious or overwhelmed with stress, I couldn't really help them. We had to address what was going on up here in order for them to physically rehabilitate. So I went back to school and got my degree in psychology. I thought I was going to go back into physical therapy to help people with physical issues deal mentally, but it just became broader and really helping people understand how our mind works and how to make it work for instead of against us. Because if you think of how you define success, how this person over here defines success, how anyone defines success, it all starts up here. It all starts with their mindset. And for some reason, we aren't teaching young people or even older people how to make this work for instead of against them, because this is our biggest path to success, but it's also our biggest path to failure. And so when we can overcome the challenges that we have in here and we can make it so our mind actually facilitates our success, that's when not only are we externally successful, but when we feel it too, when we enjoy it, when we have that gratitude and really loving what we create in our lives.
Well, what was it that draws you to that so much? I mean, obviously this is a service to people. Is this the through line to all of that, whether it's PT or it's psychology? When was it you realized you were drawn to helping people?
I feel like everyone's drawn to helping people, right? I mean, I talk to young people. I'm like, what do you want to do? And they say, well, I don't know, but I know I want to help people. So I think it's just human nature to want to contribute to a cause greater than ourselves. Not to be geeky, but when we look at the research in positive psychology, right? What positive psychology is basically the study of happiness, what makes us happy and fulfilled, we realize that when we contribute to a cause greater than ourselves, a meaningful cause to us, that's when we feel good. So guess it's kind of a self-centered approach, but that's, when we can do that, when we can really find that purpose and our mission in life where we can serve others and get the fulfillment, I think that's a great life.
Yeah. Well, you are the happiness expert. That's actually what brought us together the very first time so many years ago now. But so much so, when I say happiness expert, like you, Dr. E, are Shaq's head coach for happiness.
Shaquille O'Neal says that I am his head coach for happiness, and who has a bigger head than Shaq? That's a lot of work.
How does that happen? How do you become his head coach for happiness?
It's just a science. My first TEDx talk was called The Science of Happiness. Happiness is a science. And so when we apply the science of happiness, we all can be happier. Complete disclosure, Shaq has always been happy. So it wasn't like I had a lot of work to do.
That was an easy job.
Right. But all of us can be. I think a lot of times people are like, oh, my life is like this, or I've always thought like this. It's all what goes on in our minds, and we can rewire our brains to see things in a different way. I probably have always been annoyingly happy, but I also used to be a worrier. I would worry about anything. Like, give me a topic, I'll worry about it. And I'll stay up late, and I'll worry about it, and I can't eat, and I can't sleep because of it. And I remember when I was in psychology school, I was talking to a friend of mine who had generalized anxiety disorder, which just is the official term for worry. And I remember talking to her. I remember we were out on the street, 15th and Vine in Philadelphia, and I remember having a conversation with her and saying, you can change your mindset. Like, you can rewire your brain so you don't work. And literally, as I'm saying it, if you were given advice where you're like, oh, that's actually for me.
You're talking to yourself.
I literally was like, oh, that's for me. Mm-hmm. And so I decided I was going to stop being the worrier and retrain my brain to not worry. And that's exactly what I've done. My husband has been ill for a very long time. He was diagnosed with ALS over 9 years ago. He's been on a ventilator for over 7 years and a feeding tube, and is completely paralyzed and nonverbal. When I say he could die any day, that's not a catastrophic distortion. It's true. He could die any day. And yet I know I've rewired my brain so that I don't exist in a state of worry. I don't exist in this overwhelming stress of when is he going to die? He's going to die. Oh my gosh, my life's going to be horrible. It's going to happen. I've come to accept it. It hasn't been easy, but I've been able to rewire my brain. And we all can do this. I'm not magical. We all can take the steps to rewire our brain again so it works for instead of against us. Life throws us stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Right? And how do we choose to deal with it? And not only how do we choose to deal with it, but what skills do we have to deal with it? I was just talking to a new client today, and she's a mom of a teenager, and she's like, I want to be closer to my teen. We're not connecting. And what I say to her is what I say to all of my clients, which is, if you haven't had the skills training, why would you ever know how to do it? When we get the skills training and we practice it, we all can get better. We all can deal with things better. We all can be happier regardless of what's going on in life.
So it's kind of that notion of, I think a lot of people think this is just who I am. I am a stressful person. Yeah. I am a worrier.
Yeah.
But there's actually ways that you can change that and kind of, because I always say control what you can control. Mm-hmm. And that always calms me down just to think of what can I control. But there's actually a way to control the things that go on in my head as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And for some reason, we don't learn how to do that. I remember when I went to college, to undergrad, I was very fearful of the notion of the freshman 15. Right. I didn't want to gain 15 pounds. And in complete disclosure, I wasn't going to not drink beer, you know what I mean? Yeah. Which probably would have helped. And so I went into college. My mantra was, exercise is against my religion. Now, it wasn't really against my religion. I just didn't like to exercise. But I went into college and I said to myself, I'm going to start to exercise and I'm going to like it. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I didn't want to, grudgingly do it. I wanted to do it and enjoy it. And I actually changed my mindset such that I taught group fitness, which we now, aerobics, for 20 years. That's how much I changed my mindset and loved it. I didn't know what I was doing then. Now that I have a degree in psychology and I know kind of the mechanism of what's going on, we can rewire our brain for anything.
So you had hacked it way back then. Well, you talked about this, and if I'm not mistaken, you have one whose name is Mitzi, where you talk about your inner voice. And I think that's something that we see people struggling with all the time, especially doing what we do. We a lot of times sit down with people who are on camera. They're not used to being there. Now you've got all these lights, all these cameras, strange people, and you can almost see their inner voice just breaking them down inside. So what is it that you see most about people and their struggle with their own inner voice?
I think the first thing is not being aware that that inner voice is not true. Right? So what goes on in our mind, typically, if it goes on up here, we accept it as real. Very rarely do we take a thought out and say, how accurate and thoughtful is this? And yet the majority of our thoughts, and by the way, we have at least 60,000 thoughts racing through our head. The majority of our thoughts are subjective, not objective. That means they are perceptions, interpretations, beliefs, assumptions, as opposed to facts. Most of what we think is not factual. And yet when it's going on up here, we act as if it's true. And we do that with our inner critic. So when our inner critic is saying, you're in over your head, you don't know what you're doing, people think you're a loser. We aren't necessarily aware of the thought, but we are so aware of the impact of it. And we act as if that's true. We have so many thoughts in our minds. I always tell my clients, 60,000 thoughts racing through our heads, and a lot of times they're conflicting thoughts, right? If I'm on stage, part of me may be like, hey, bring it on. I'm gonna give a great presentation. But there may be another part of me that's like, don't mess up. Remember that time you messed up? And so we can have different thoughts kind of having this battle within our mind. The key is to be aware that what we're saying to ourselves is almost always not true. And then when you look at what you're saying to yourself, then you can say, is this thought serving me? And if not, we don't have to judge ourselves. We don't have to be like, what's wrong with me? Now I'm going to beat myself up for having an inner critic. We all have an inner critic. Mm-hmm. And understanding that the inner critic actually serves a purpose. So the way that my optimistic viewpoint views an inner critic is the inner critic actually wants you to be better. I always say it's the difference between a drill sergeant and a cheerleader. So a drill sergeant demeans the soldier for the ultimate goal of the soldier to be successful on the battlefield. Mm-hmm. A cheerleader encourages, the team ultimately to be successful in what their endeavor is. Our inner critic really is that drill sergeant. And if we can hear it for what it's saying, which is, I want you to be better, when we look in the mirror and that inner critic says, look at your body. Oh, I want you to be healthier. Oh, okay, thank you. If I'm going on stage and that inner critic says, don't mess up, what it really is saying is, I want you to do better. So if we can reinterpret what that inner critic positively is wanting us to do, then we can work towards that.
Well, and I would assume that we take it almost as factual because we've learned to trust ourselves. It's almost we're the ones saying it to ourselves.
Well, and who has ever learned to take out a thought and ask yourself, is this working for me or not? Right. We aren't trained in that. And it's just a skill. You don't need a PhD to learn this. It's just a skill. And when you can learn that, and I do this every single day. I do this with kids as young as 5 or 6 years old, and I do it with 50 and 60-year-olds to help them identify what are they saying to themselves. And I will tell you, one of my favorite things is when I'm working with a client and I'm asking them, the question I ask is, if you could stick a microphone in your brain, what would you hear yourself saying? And I love when I ask that question, and as they're speaking, they start laughing. Because they'll say something like, well, I'm saying I'm a worthless piece of crap. And then they laugh. And I love that they laugh because they're able to see that's so not true.
That's absurd.
Yeah, it's completely absurd. And so being aware of what we're saying to ourselves is just the first step to being able to control it.
Well, I started smiling as you were saying because I started thinking of what I was even thinking in my own head.
Which was what?
I'm not going to say it. I'll tell you after. No, well, it actually does. It makes me think of this. And is this the same thing when we talk about inner critic that...
Deflection.
You've called me out on deflecting many times before. But is that what imposter syndrome is? Because that's something that I have struggled with at times. Is that kind of the same concept of imposter syndrome? I don't belong doing this. People shouldn't listen to me. Is that me just listening to my own voice?
Yes. How's that for a deep answer? Yeah. 70% of the population experiences imposter syndrome.
Really?
Yeah. And the higher people go, the more likely they are to have it. My favorite story is about Meryl Streep, who consistently, when she goes into an audition, and I don't even know why she would even be auditioned anymore, she still goes in thinking, I'm in over my head. They're going to realize this. So it happens to us all. The key is to realize, oh, this is just my inner critic. It's not true.
So you talk a lot about that inner critic, and it just seems like the inner critic is the one with all the negative thoughts. So we have 60,000 thoughts in our head.
And 35,000 of them on a regular day are negative.
Are negative. That's what I was going to ask. Where do you think that comes from? Why is it so negative?
Well, I think it's evolutionarily. I mean, if you think about it, when our cave ancestors, let's say, heard a rustling in the bush, and if they were like, it's probably nothing. Let's go. Let's go, have a conversation over there. They probably wouldn't live another day. So it really was evolutionarily very adaptive to focus on the negative. And, when you think about this concept of the psychological red zone, when we experience high levels of distress, our brain goes right into negative filtering. The part of our brain that's processing the information when we're at high levels of distress is negative. What is wrong, so that we can take care of that. The issue is that our brain goes into this red zone, limbic system hijack, focusing on what's wrong for non-life and death situations. And we tend to be in that red zone for longer periods of time. So evolutionarily, you heard a rustling in the bush, you thought, it's an animal, let me get away or get rid of the animal, and then you got out of this red zone. What's happening for a lot of people is we're spending a lot of time in that red zone. We're not in and out, which is the way our brain is supposed to function.
The limbic system is one of the oldest structures of our brains. It produces natural instincts that our ancestors used to survive by triggering behaviors needed to eat and drink, reproduce, care for our young, and react to our surroundings. As the core driver of our emotions and behaviors, the limbic system is often referred to as our emotional nervous system.
So I don't want to go too geeky science, but I'm always interested in it. The limbic system. So this is the system that teaches that tells us fight or flight. Mm-hmm. How does that all work?
So depending on where we are in the level of distress, and distress is, a lot of people think stress is bad, but stress can be positive. We call that eustress, E-U-S-T-R-E-S-S. That's you're planning a vacation. It's like stressful, but it's exciting, right? Or people getting married. It's stressful or exciting. And some people getting divorced. It's stressful, but exciting. So it's really about our interpretation. So stress can be very positive. But distress is kind of, I call it the catch-all, like any emotion you don't want. Sadness, anger, frustration, anxiety, worry, fear, guilt, shame, helplessness, hopelessness, all goes in the distress pile. And distress exists on a continuum from 0, no distress at all. Just got up at the massage table, even if they didn't touch you, right? Life is great. To 10 out of 10, the most distressed you've been. So for people who are angry at a 10 out of 10, for example, they're probably yelling or the proverbial steam's coming out of their ears, right? So hopefully most people aren't living at a 10. And most people aren't living at a 0 either. We're usually somewhere in between. And this psychological red zone, the way I define it, is when we're at a 7 out of 10 or higher. So a 7, an 8, a 9, or 10, that's when we're in this red zone. And in the red zone, we move from, in the green zone, yellow zone, we're using frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe of our brain it's the part of our brain that differentiates us from other animals, right? So it allows us to engage in executive functioning, problem solving, perspective taking. When we're in this green zone using our frontal lobe, this is where resilience happens, right? Like times are tough, I can handle it. It's where confidence takes place. I'm not perfect, I believe in myself, right? So we can see the good and the not so good when we're using that frontal lobe, and we can solve problems. As we go up on the distress scale, though, we go from seeing the good and the not so good to focusing almost exclusively on the negatives, so that when we get into that red zone, the 7, the 8, the 9, the 10, instead of rational brain, it's our limbic system that hijacks our rational thinking. It's almost like when someone's been drinking too much. Like, you know what I mean? They think differently. It's kind of like that, but instead it's our limbic system, and the limbic system is the fight or flight mechanism in our brain. It's trying to protect us. So we go into negative filtering. We focus on what's wrong, and it's super hard to see what's right. We focus on the problem, and it's very hard to figure out the solution because we tend to get stuck. When we look at, for example, organizations right now, 91% of workers say that they experience unmanageable stress. That means they're spending a lot of time in that red zone. Between 70 and 77% of workers say they are burned out. That means they are living in the red zone. That means the way that they are processing information is not rational. It's not about being smart or not smart. When we're in the red zone, when I'm in the red zone, I'm not thinking rationally because we're using a different part of our brain. And what we want to be really aware of is when we're making decisions using an irrational part of our brain, that's when we tend to say things we later regret or do things that really aren't in our best interest or in the best interest of others.
Well, it's interesting to think because even, I'll say today, even I came into work today and the same problems or circumstances were there that were there yesterday, but today it was weight of the world. Everything's going wrong. Nothing's going right. I'm stressed. I go in my office. I shut the door. Not now. This is a terrible day. But then when I took a minute and spent some time with the team and laughed a little bit, and then I went back, I was like, oh, this is manageable. So that's everything that this is the problems don't change, the situation or the environment doesn't change, how I'm perceiving them is.
Yeah. Because what was your level of distress when you came into the office today?
I was probably an 8.
Yeah, so you're already in the red zone. You didn't even need something to put you in there. Yeah.
Oh, I can jump straight to the red zone. I know that.
Now you're just bragging. So, and the key is to be aware when we're in that red zone. And I was saying, like, don't let anything out of your mouth when you're in the red zone. And don't put anything in your mouth when you're in the red zone, because that's when you consume things you later regret. So being aware, what you did was you closed your door, and hopefully you did something that would elevate your mood and decrease your distress. Taking breaths, moving. I just gave a keynote on Monday to 1,500 people, and I had everyone stand up. It was one of those rooms where like 1,500 people should not be there, but I still had everyone stand up, and I had them skip in place because there was no room to move. I had them smile, head up high, shoulders back, and skip in place for 30 seconds. And then everyone sat down, and everyone decreased their distress by at least 2 points, 30 seconds. Wow. So we want to be aware of where we are, and then we want to do something healthy and helpful to decrease that distress. Movement, using your breath, diaphragmatic breathing, watching funny videos. For me, SNL is like my go-to, like hopping on YouTube and watching a funny video. These kinds of things will decrease the distress level. So then we go from limbic system to frontal lobe. Now I can solve the problem. And even if you can't solve the problem, now I can handle the problem, I can accept the problem, and I can accept what I can change, and I can do what I can do. But we can only do that when we're out of the red zone.
Situations can't put you into the red zone, but how you react to them is where you are in the continuum. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we often think, when you think about a time when you were in the red zone, a lot of times we'll go to a specific event, an experience, a person, right? Yep. Our in-laws often, just saying. But it's actually not those people or experiences. It's our interpretation. It's what we say to ourselves. And the example that I used was from my postdoctoral training. So when I did my postdoctoral training, I worked at a major medical center. I was the psychologist who was there to help people dealing with trauma or, major illness or an accident, that kind of thing. And I had a client whose name was Roger. Roger was a 43-year-old electrician who'd been working on a wire that was supposed to be inactive, but it was quite active, such that when he touched the wire, a volt of current went through his body and burned him so severely that the doctor gave his wife the following options. We can let him die, or we can surgically amputate both of his arms to save his life. So they decided to surgically amputate both of Roger's arms, and it was my job as the psychologist to help him deal with this, right? The depression and the helplessness and hopelessness of having no arms and being an electrician. So I remember going up to Roger's room. I walked up to his room, and I remember, my palms are sweaty, my heart's racing, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to help this guy? Mm-hmm. What if I say something that makes it worse, right? And I knock on this door. I go in, and there's Roger, and I'll forget, he was seated in a chair, and even seated, you could tell he was tall. He was 6 foot, brown hair, bushy brown mustache, and he had a big smile on his face. What's going on, Roger? And he said, I'm so grateful to be alive. I'm so grateful that my life has been saved. And he said, I don't know why it has been saved, but I know in every cell of my body that it's been saved for a very important reason. Not the reaction I expected. Yeah. So not only was he not in the red zone, but who's in the red zone?
Yeah, you
Me,
were
right?
sweaty palms.
I've got the inner critic going on, like, don't mess up, sweaty palms racing hard. So that's just a great example of, like, do not cut your arms off thinking that's going to help you feel better, right? It's not the event, it's his interpretation. And he was so steadfast in his belief that he was here still for a very important reason, that not only did he get through his medical treatment and his rehab faster, not only from the mindset, but we know how the mindset can heal the body. I mean, he left the hospital way sooner than any physician ever expected him to because of his perspective.
Well, I feel like a story like that can give everybody a shift in their perspective, right?
Right, because we all think we have problems until you think that. Yeah.
It's easy to disregard stress as a normal part of everyday life. But as Dr. Lombardo says, stress is an epidemic in America. In fact, in her latest book, Get Out of the Red Zone, she shares that stress costs U.S. companies $300 billion a year.
It seems to be an epidemic, though. When we talk about distress, we talk about stress. We talk about people's negative mindset. It seems at least to have elevated at times. Yeah. I think we've talked about this before. Social media is a huge impact on our own self-view. But when it comes to stress, it impacts U.S. businesses in a way that they probably don't even understand. How people are feeling every day is impacting them. Is it true? $30 billion a year it costs U.S. companies just because of stress? What is the stat?
$300 billion.
$300 billion.
To things like absenteeism, they aren't there. Presenteeism, when their bodies are there, but they're not really there. Healthcare utilization and turnover. We cannot focus on solving problems. We cannot be our most effective when we're in this red zone because your subconscious basically feels like it's drowning. So if you were literally drowning, how well could you execute your job, right? How well can you problem solve? How well can you think about alternative ways to create, generate revenue for your business? You can't do it. And so it's this notion that soft skills lead to hard results because we know that when people are in this green zone, research out of Harvard shows that we're 31% more productive. Think about that.
31%.
31% more productive. You get 31% more done without working more. We have a 37% increase in sales. Holy cow. Like, what would that mean to any organization to have a 37% increase in sales just because we get people out of this red zone and into the green zone? We're more productive, we're more creative, we're more effective, our bodies are healthier, we're better team workers, right? We're more engaged. I mean, everything positive happens when we're in this green zone. And there are scientific steps that we can take. It's not, you don't have to think about woo-woo things. There are things that we all can do to get into this green zone and function in this green zone, regardless of what's going on.
Well, I think the important part of this, too, is the things that we can do for ourselves. But I think the understanding that everybody's going through this, that everybody's on the same continuum. They're just in different places.
Yep.
There needs to be empathy that somebody might not be performing well because they're going through something. Or, somebody that I'm talking to on camera might not be giving me that true, authentic story because they've got an inner critic going on. Are all of those things connected as well? Inner critic and stress? And
because the higher our distress is, the more our inner critic comes out. I can control my inner critic when I'm in the green zone, no problem. But if I'm at an 8 or a 9 or a 10, my inner critic's taking over. Right? It's just the way that our minds are. And when someone's on camera, I think so often people don't realize how important their stories are because they've been living it and they think, it's not that big of a deal. But understanding that what their story is not only important to hearing it, but how impactful that can be and motivating and inspiring that can be to other people. Because so many people think that they are alone. They think, I'm the only one. I'm the only one who has this inner critic. I'm the only one who can't do this. I'm the only one who, getting out of bed is just, it's a challenge for me every single day. You're not the only one. And sometimes just hearing a story of someone else who has been there and has gotten over it, not in a Pollyanna and I woke up and everything was fine, but understanding their struggles and how they overcame it. I truly believe that sharing those stories is such a gift to give to the world. And it doesn't have to be perfectly presented. It doesn't need to be polished. It just needs to be from their heart. And that is a gift that they can share with people because we all go through struggles. It's what we do with those struggles. Do we beat ourselves up on it? Do we sit, in bed in a dark room and can't move? And that happens. And that's not a judgment thing. But it's then, what are the steps that maybe someone took to be able to overcome that? And how can other people really benefit from that story?
Now, that is a conversation we have here all the time. A lot of the people that we have on camera, that I sit down and talk to, they're people that I've just met. But they're telling these heartbreaking stories about rare chronic diseases. And especially in the rare disease world, they definitely feel alone because the statistics show they almost are.
Yeah.
They don't know anybody that's even heard of the disease they're living with, let alone understands their experience. So that conversation we have all the time is understand when you share this story, you might reach that one person who needed to hear it at that one time to just give them a little bit of hope to keep fighting a little longer, to keep digging for more answers.
Don't they wish they had that person in their life a couple of years ago?
Exactly. Yeah.
And, it's interesting because, I used to be a physical therapist and now I'm a psychologist. So I'm really, when I first got my degree in psychology, I was really focused on what we call medically unexplained symptoms, which is basically, anything that we don't have a specific diagnosis for. And so many of my clients would come in, and I will never forget, it was the early 90s. I had a client, I was still a physical therapist. I had a client who found out that he had AIDS, and he was ecstatically happy. And I'm like, And this was when there was no treatment for AIDS. It was a death sentence. And I was like, I was trying to understand, like, why are you happy? For so many years, he had had all of these symptoms and he didn't know what was wrong with him. And just knowing that there was a diagnosis, that he wasn't crazy, he wasn't making these things up, which is what he was led to believe by a lot of medical professionals, just having that name and that label helped him. And it's interesting because as I've done a lot more research on my own and really looking at the research, it's rare that people have a diagnosis. 75% of complaints to a primary care physician, i.e., 3 out of 4 times someone says, "Doc, this doesn't feel good, this hurts," the primary care physician doesn't know why. 75% of the time, and that statistic is prevalent in the US and in Great Britain. What does that mean? It means that people aren't crazy. In medicine, we are advanced, but we aren't that advanced. Yeah. And so there's so much out there. So if someone's experiencing what I would call medically unexplained symptom, it doesn't mean they're making it up. It doesn't mean they're crazy. It's what can we do to look at that and to help that. And also understanding that stress causes or exacerbates, makes worse 90% of illness. And I can remember working with clients. When I first got my psychology degree, I worked with a pain specialist, an MD. And in order for the people with chronic pain to get their medication, they had to see me. And they were not very pleased to see me. And they would often come in like this. And I didn't read their mind, but I could read their mind in terms of them thinking that they were being sent to me because we thought they were making up their pain. And the first thing I always said to them was, I know you're not making up your pain. Your symptoms are real. When you are stressed, you who I'm assuming doesn't have a chronic pain symptom, when you are stressed, does your body ever feel worse?
Oh, sure.
Of course, right? We get the headaches and the neck pain and the back pain and the digestive issues, right? Our bodies and our minds are so interconnected. And so what I always would tell my clients is not that you're making it up. It's just that when you experience distress, whether it come in the form of anxiety, depression, overwhelm, sadness, whatever, anger, resentment, our bodies have that reaction. So we can address the body, we can address the mind. When we address the mind, the body can be better. When we address the body, the mind can be better. And so it just was like, where are we going to start?
Yeah. Well, and I wonder when it comes to understanding, helping people understand and empathize that this is happening. Like you say, over 75% of people go without a diagnosis.
Yeah.
People know their bodies. You know when something is wrong. You know when something is not operating or feeling the way it should. And so to be told there's nothing wrong with you it's devastating for some people. Yeah. It's absolutely horrific. But I think, one thing that's so important for me in understanding this is the team and I, we're always working on how do we create a place where somebody I sit down with is in that place or has had this really long struggle with a terrible disease. And maybe they have a diagnosis, maybe they don't. But not only are they living that way, now they have to be on camera. So there's more stressors and there's more, no one's going to understand or this doesn't matter. And when we talked on the phone recently, you had said one of those things that's important to think about is mattering. So talk to me, what exactly is mattering and why is that so important? You touched on it a little bit.
This is, as a psychologist, we all have like different areas where we're focused on. And my last book was on the red zone and getting out of the red zone. And my now focus is on mattering. So it's a cool concept. Mattering is when we feel like we add value to others and others add value to us. And we know from the research, there's a lot of research, especially with young people, looking at how when someone feels like they matter, depressive symptoms go down, anxiety goes down, overwhelm and stress goes down. When we look at mattering in the workplace, engagement goes up, productivity goes up, all those wonderful things that we talked about, the green zone, that's what happens when we feel mattering. As someone who's going through a tough time, and they can feel really stuck for sure, when they can serve others, when they can help others, that's that sense of mattering. That's that sense of, even though I'm going through a really tough time, I'm contributing to a cause greater than myself. I'm helping someone else. And, I'll give the example of my husband. So my husband, he's a super successful executive. We met at the gym, right? He was very athletic. And now for the past 7.5 years, he's been on a ventilator, cannot move, cannot speak. It's hard for him to have a sense of mattering. But when he reaches out to other people, whether they have ALS or they're going through a difficult time, or for him, he's very into financial planning. And so he's been working with our children and our friends' children who are, let's say, graduating from college, who have no idea like what a credit card is. And he starts to teach them how to save money and how to be smart financially. Like, that's his sense of mattering. He can't move, right? He can't even speak, but he can be helping these young people. And for him, that just fills him up emotionally. There's always something that we can do outside of ourselves to feel like we, again, are contributing to a cause greater than ourselves. And that cause may be a sample size of 1, and it may be a sample size of 1,000,000 or anything in between. But when we can do that, that really not only helps the other person, but it helps us feel so much better. So as you're interviewing, the people who are coming in who are dealing with all kinds of, horrific situations that they're probably dealing with their health, if they can get that in their mindset of, even if it just helps one person, that's going to change everything. And, personally, I don't have that significant of a story, but I will say I graduated high school with 47 kids in my class. I was friends with all of them. I remember my best friend, Jamie Boris, ran for school president. She had to speak to the entire upper school. So let's say that was 300 people, less than 300 people. And I thought, I would rather cut off my entire right arm, thanks to Roger, than speak in front of, 300 people who I knew. And I knew, we were all friends. I had to go through that mindset myself of, and I do it now even when I'm on TV, if I'm on the Today Show, a couple million people watching me. The old inner critic me would be, oh, don't mess up, what are you going to say? But when I really focus on serving other people and how if I'm speaking to, 4 million people, even if one person hears me, that's powerful.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to ask, and you beat me to it, was GMA, Today Show. You're on stage, you're giving TED Talks, you're talking with all these people. Do you still wrestle with that voice and you just know how to use it, or have you, for the most part, silenced it?
Sometimes it will creep up, but I just remind myself, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And I'll give an example. It was a Today Show. They were doing sweeps. And so usually Today Show used to call and be like, it would be 10 a.m. here. And they'd be like, can you be on 9 o'clock tomorrow in New York? And we're in Chicago. So, that was challenging. But I remember there was it was sweeps. And so they called me on Monday and I had all the way to Friday. And the segment was, what is one thing that you can do? And they were looking at relationships. That was one person. And I don't know, finances was one person. And I was, actually, I think I was relationships. And so they said, what's one thing you can do? And I was talking about forgiveness, the power of forgiveness, that when we forgive others, it not only helps our relationship, but it's a true gift to ourselves. And I remember I was in New York and I flew home. I still had my makeup and my same outfit on because I literally got in the car. I'm walking through O'Hare, our airport here. And these 2 women stopped me. And they said, we saw you on TV today. Now, they only knew it was me because I still had the same outfit on. So I'm not pretending like all these people are like, paparazzi. But they said, what you said to us really impacted us. And one of them was talking about a friend who they hadn't seen in years and years and years. And she actually had reached out to that friend. 4 or 5 million people were watching me. One person had that change. And I will tell you, I could literally cry thinking about it. It was just, it just hit my heart so strongly. And to be able to make that impact on one person is incredible.
That makes it worth it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's purpose.
It's mattering.
It's mattering. Sorry, we're going to change it to it's mattering.
The next book, yeah.
So I wonder too, and this is going back a little bit, but you brought up your husband again. You've learned how to shift your mindset to cope with what is an incredibly difficult situation for your entire family. You were talking about how it impacts your girls, how it impacts him, how it impacts you. Are there times when you will sit back and just let yourself feel? Yes. Let yourself go into that zone? And
in complete transparency, I am not good at that. I grew up with... Sorry, Mom. I grew up with a mother who didn't believe in negative emotions, which there are no emotions that are negative. So when my husband was first diagnosed, I was like, all right, how are we going to deal with this? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And it took me a couple of years to acknowledge that it's important for me to cry and it's important for me to sit in the ugly, right? Can I focus on the positive? Can I focus on how this maybe has brought our family together, how we have met the most exquisite individuals through this process, so caring and so loving and just reaching out in the most beautiful ways. That is definitely there. It's also important for us to sit in the distress and allow us to process those emotions. In complete disclosure, when I was writing my book, Get Out of the Red Zone, I was focused on how do you get out of the red zone, right? How do you change your state and how do you rewire your brain? And then I was like, oh, I probably should talk about the importance of actually processing those emotions because I've avoided them for a while. But yeah, so I will sing. And now part of my practice is every day I wake up, there's a forgiveness prayer that I read, and then I journal for about 30 to 35 minutes. It's 3 long pages, and I just journal and I see what comes out. And sometimes it's fantasizing about the future, and sometimes it's grr. But just processing what's going on in our mind is really important. So it's not that we want to deny what's going on. We want to acknowledge it. And one of the best ways to do it, and I'm a therapist and I do believe in the talk therapy, but one of the best ways to do it is to actually write it out. In psychology, we call that written emotional disclosure, which basically is journaling. And when we look at the research of just writing out our deepest, darkest fears, like what's really bothering us, when we write it out, a lot of times people say, well, doesn't that like make it worse? And in the short term, our depressive symptoms, anxiety can go up. But in the long term, we find that depressive symptoms go down, anxiety goes down, distress goes down, immune function increases, visits to the doctor decrease just by having an intervention of writing out your deepest, darkest secrets.
That doesn't even
3
make
times
sense to me. How is that possible?
Because remember, we had 60,000 thoughts racing through our heads?
Yeah.
We don't know what we're thinking all the time, and yet it impacts us. If we have a thought that's not helpful to us, we will feel it physiologically in our body, as we talked about. We'll feel it emotionally, and it will impact how we interact with others. We don't even realize it. So when we take it from here and put it on paper, we can process it differently. And sometimes when we take it from here and put it on paper, it's almost like we can get rid of it. We no longer have to keep regenerating it in our mind because we're done with it. And there's research, there's a gentleman named James Pennebaker, a psychologist, who's done this really great research on just how powerful that is. And again, the intervention is 3 times for writing about 20 minutes. That's it. And then done. Anyone can do that. You don't need money to do it. You don't need a beautiful leather-bound, journal. It can be a scrap piece of paper and and a pencil. Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing. Whenever I hear that how it like physically impacts you, that always kind of blows my mind how everything is connected so much.
I mean, immune function, like we can look at IgA, the specific parts of in our blood, we can see differences from that. That's cool. Yeah.
It's really cool. I could actually geek out on that for a while. We won't, but I could. We'll have to, we'll connect next time. So I think one thing that would be valuable, very valuable for me, and we're always working on this as well, is how we impact others in that situation and how environment can play a role in that. So I say that to say it's very important for us when somebody comes here that it is a warm and welcoming place, that you are amongst friends. Because again, all that stress, all those nerves, all that inner critic, we acknowledge to ourselves before they get here that this is how somebody's feeling. Yeah. Because we're actually all very comfortable behind the camera. So being in front of the camera is a very different story. But what are things that people can do even on an everyday, people they meet on the street or people in their family, to help somebody kind of shift on that continuum down to the green zone and get themselves level?
Yeah. So there are a lot of ways to do that. And some of it is moving our bodies, right? If you notice that someone is kind of stressed out, hey, let's go for a walk. Like it really can be that easy. Again, skipping around, jumping on the bed, any kind of movement can be great. Music can be great to decrease our distress. You probably have heard a song that you haven't heard in years, even decades, and it brings you back to that time.
Definitely.
So using that, laughter can be wonderful, but sometimes it's just that connection. It's the sincere looking at someone's eyes and saying thank you for being here. It's talking about silly things so that it decreases people's distress, so that they have the connection with you. It's really highlighting their positives. It's amazing to me, and I work with incredibly successful people, and I say successful, i.e. on paper. They're executives, they're professional athletes, they're people who we all know and we're maybe in awe of, and they still have this inner critic. And so just acknowledging the greatness that's in them, not in a, you're the greatest thing in the world, but something specific about them. What's one thing that you really notice that they do, that they have done, who they are, and pulling that out of them, so that they really feel seen and heard. I mean, that's such a gift. And goes back to mentoring, but it really is like, how are they showing up and how are you noticing that they're showing up? So even just acknowledging like, hey, I bet this is probably tough. We're so grateful that you're here. And it could be, as they're getting on camera, but it could be someone who's, anyone, let's say in an office, anyone who's interacting with anyone, to really acknowledge where that person is coming from and appreciate what they are doing at that particular time. And I'll say, this isn't what you're asking about, but what just popped to mind is, when we're working with our kids and our teens especially, as parents, it is super easy to point out what our teens or young people are not doing well. Super easy. And we got to remember that frontal lobe is not developed, right? Our young people are predisposed to be in the red zone because our young people, that frontal lobe is not fully developed until 25. In males, it's even later. So their rational thinking isn't there. So as parents, it's not that we want to only acknowledge the positive. It's not that we want our children to get away with everything, but to really acknowledge where they are and what's positive that they're doing. That's such a gift. And when they feel heard, that's when they're going to study harder. That's when they're going to clean their room. That's when they're going to want to get off their phone and actually have a conversation with you. And so I think, this is pertinent certainly in the work field, but it's also so pertinent in our personal lives, whether it's with our children, our partner, our parents, our family members, our friends, really pointing out sincerely the positive, because most people are trying their best. Yeah. They may not be doing great, but they're trying their best. And if we can acknowledge and empathize with that, then we can be on their side, and then together we can figure out how to make that change.
That's such a hard thing too, and I'm glad you brought up kids, because my wife and I think about this all the time. We have a couple athletes in our family, and then our youngest Max. He's not much of an athlete, but he's starting soccer, so hopefully someday he will be. But I think there's a part of me that lives vicariously through both of them, because I remember a time when I was in high school or middle school sports, and I didn't take it very seriously. And so now when I see how talented they are, my daughter's an incredibly talented swimmer. My son is a star soccer player, and I see that, and I want them to see. Just imagine if you work when you come home, when you keep going, but then we're also very careful. Like I want them just to love what they're doing.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing that where you do balance that. I don't want to point out all the time that you haven't really been practicing much or you haven't done this. It's just an interesting balance of making sure you're not squashing their dreams by trying to make them be better.
And one of the greatest ways to address that is to ask open-ended questions. Socratic questioning. So instead of saying you're being, not that you do this, but I literally was just talking to a parent today who was telling me that they have a child who has great potential as an athlete and they aren't putting in the extra time, energy, and effort. And so the parents have been suggesting that their child is being lazy. Well, when you hear you're being lazy as a child, that doesn't usually motivate you to be like, oh, okay, right. Well, let me change, right? Yeah. Okay, you think I'm being lazy, blank you, I'm going to stay on my phone. Yeah. So Socratic questioning, what would it be like? What would it be like if you put in the time, energy, and effort? What would it be like if you, if instead of coming home and getting on your phone, you decided to, I don't know, a basketball player, to do 100 free throws? What would that be like? So instead of telling them, you're putting in the possibility. And as children, they don't want to be told, but they want to come up with it themselves. And we know, just as a human experience, if we come up with our own decision, we're much more likely to execute it. So asking the questions where you want the answer, don't ask questions like, why are you being such a lazy nut? Because right. Then they're going to answer it. But, putting out that potential to them, what would it be like? And even putting out there what would be positive and what might not be positive. On another realm, it's the same thing like with social media. When I'm working with a kiddo who's, dealing with social media issues, the first thing I ask is, what's good about social media? And they look at me like, well, you were the first person who's ever asked me that. There's a positive reason that they're doing it. In the olden days, when I first got my degree in psychology, I worked with people who were trying to quit smoking cigarettes. And the first thing I always asked was, what's good about smoking? And they were like, what's wrong with you? It causes lung cancer. There's a reason why people do it. And what we need to do when we want to change a behavior is to get the good out of the bad behavior. So for social media, for example, it's a way to decompress. It's a way to connect. Awesome. We need to find other ways that they can decompress and they can connect that are offline. Because if we don't address those needs, we're never going to get sustained change. I will tell you, and parents don't believe me until I'm working with their child, I have never told any of my clients, and I do work with a lot of young people, I've never told them you need to get off social media. But I will say whenever the conversation comes up, 99.999% of the time, they choose to either limit their time to, yesterday I had a kiddo, he's super jock. I mean, he's sophomore, 3 varsity, sports. And he was talking about how social media was bothering him. I was like, oh, well, tell me more about that. What's good? What's not so good? And he said to me, what's really hard is the notifications popping up all the time, because he's now going into junior year. So colleges are starting, and June 15th is the time when the NCAA rules say that they can reach out. And so his notifications are on all the time. And he's like, yeah, it really stresses me out. I was like, what do you want to do about that? He's like, I want to get rid of my notifications. Would you like to do that right now? In my office. He turns them off. Now, he's not off social media, forever. He still has access to it. But just that taking it away, and I didn't tell him to do it. He came up with it himself. And so he's more likely to carry out that.
I have one last question for you, and that is, if you had one pearl of wisdom, and this is something I ask everybody, if you had one pearl of wisdom that you could share with anybody who's listening that could make them just a little bit happier today, what would it be?
Happiness is just a state of mind, and our state of mind and how we think is just a skill. And if we can learn the skills of how to, again, make this work for instead of against us, we don't have to wait for our partner, our children, our parents to be better. We don't have to wait for the world to be kinder. When we can just change what we're saying to ourselves, we can change inside. And when we change inside, literally everything outside of us changes. So just to be empowered that regardless of what's going on in your life, and I say this not just as a psychologist, but someone who's been going through a husband who, we've been together over half my life. He is my soulmate, and he was given this diagnosis, this fatal diagnosis 9 years ago. I say this of being through the trenches myself. We get to control how we view things and how we show up in the world. And the best thing I think that any of us can do is to take the time to learn the skills so that our mind's working for instead of against us. It doesn't mean we're going to be happy all the time, because that's, I always say that's being high. That's not being alive. We're going to still deal with difficult times, but to be empowered is to be more focused on what's going well, what we're grateful for, and the love that we have in our lives. And the more we focus on that, the more it comes into our lives. That's when we really can make a change.
Well, I can't thank you enough for being here and sharing all of this.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Until the next time. Every day our world is filled with voices, with none being more important or impactful than the one in our own head. Like most people, I've personally struggled with imposter syndrome, as my own inner critic often seems to feel that I'm not good enough. But as Dr. E says, if we can find a way to reinterpret what that voice in our head is saying, and realize that oftentimes its words aren't true, we can each find ourselves on a path to less stress and more happiness. In the end, Elizabeth has reminded me the importance of mattering, and how sharing our own stories can bring hope and enlightenment to those who just might need to hear it most. I hope our conversation provided value to even one of you out there listening. And if you've made it this far, I want to thank you for being curious. If you haven't already, hit the like and subscribe button to join us in our weekly conversations and become a part of our community.